What is the death spiral effect? How does it work and how can we reverse it? If there is a downward spiral, we can also go into an upward spiral. So what is the first step? Well, make sure to try to see if there's a turnaround leader. If we can find a turnaround leader, we have to do it ourselves.
Professor Schippers, may I ask you some questions?
Yes, of course. What do you want to know, Rico?
September 28th, we talked about the death spiral. A couple of months back, you've been writing on it, and I wrote down you're working with Ioannidis. How far along are you? What can you tell us about the death spiral as a paper?
Yes, so I worked on the paper with John Ioannidis, and Matthias Luijks is also on the paper now. He's a PhD student in Groningen. And yeah, it's almost, well, finished. I worked a lot on the paper, and it's been really a ride in the sense that I try to make a comprehensive paper with what is going on in the world, what is the death spiral effect, how does it work, and how can we reverse it? Because people, even if you don't agree with everything, I think a lot of people agree that we are not going in a direction that most people would like us to go. So
you used the word death spiral, or the words death spiral, as a metaphor. So it's a phenomenon in nature. Ants that are lost will start following each other based on their pheromones, on their smell, and then they will continue to walk in that cycle until they die.
Yes.
And the way I understand your paper, what you allowed me to read, was that you're using that to describe what you see happening in society at large.
Yeah, basically the death spiral effect, or in an ant mill, it's a dysfunctional behavior. So functional behavior can become dysfunctional in a certain setting. So usually they do this and they hunt together and they go for a prey, and then they follow each other's pheromones, and then it helps them to prey together. But when sometimes they get up in this ant mill and they start following each other's pheromones, but then it's dysfunctional behavior because they keep on doing that until they collapse. And I found out that has a lot of, let's say, you can use it as a metaphor of a collapsing society. So we make decisions and we keep making the same decisions over and over again, even though these are the wrong decisions and the outcome is not what we like, but we keep making these decisions.
So what got my attention mostly reading that piece was that you're coining a new phrase,
yes,
as it were.
Yes.
And there are some existing words in there that I want you to describe here in this interview. And I found I had never heard of them, but they existed. But death spiral as a description of a societal event, to my knowledge, that's new, right? That doesn't happen too often. So how does that work as a scientist?
Yeah, societies don't collapse that often, so that's one thing. But also
yeah, but we had the Roman Empire or whatever.
Or you mean that you come up with a new term and you want to? That's really something.
And you describe it in a scientific way.
Mm-hmm. True. Well, that spiral has been mentioned in the literature, but no one has really made a really good description of it. So, a death spiral is also a pilot can get in and they can get out of it. And so it's really something I coined it to many people and everybody reacted really enthusiastic about it. Yeah. So it's kind of hits a nerve on the one hand, and on the other hand, it had the same effect on me. When I saw the death spiral effect of the ants, I was like, oh, this is what's going on in society. And we need to really expand it and make sure to describe it well and build a theory around it. So it's a metaphor, but also a new term that I used and coined for the first time, I think, in this respect and in this really fully described way.
Okay, so that's what I want to get out of this conversation. By the way, the setting is a bit different from last talk.
Yes.
We were in your house, so now you're in my home studio. So welcome here.
Yeah, thank you.
This is how that works. So let's walk through that theory then. And the words that I mentioned a moment ago, that I had never heard of before. What is collapsology?
Collapsology, yeah, I came across that too. And actually, I was studying how do societies in general collapse, what happens just before a society collapses. And I had to go to history, but also sociology. So there's all kinds of fields that describe this. And on a company level, it's been described in management theories. But I didn't find many psychologists describing this. But collapsology is a term that I think French scientists came up with this term, and they thought it was a nice word, but it's also actually being used to describe how societies collapse. But so it's really easy. Collapsology is how societies collapse.
So it's in your you refer to that in your paper. Another thing that resonated with me was social safety theory.
Mm-hmm.
Never heard of that before.
No, honestly, I came across that too, and it's pretty new, but it's really important theory that describes how people keep their environment safe, how people need safety as an important need, and how their behavior and their health becomes really bad if they're not in a healthy environment. So there's a lot of talk also in management and in psychology of toxic environments. And a toxic environment, they mean like a manager who's screaming at you all day, or in a family, the father and mother are not behaving in a good way. And so this is, I think, a really important theory.
Then another thing, and then I would like you to walk us through what's in the paper, is the way that you describe what you observe in society currently. And this, well, first there's a premise. The premise is that we're in a death spiral and that we're in a collapsing society. Mm-hmm. That might be a big step for some people to accept that premise. Mm-hmm. Maybe you want to go into that. But let's say that's the situation. What you then in the paper describe is that we've been ignoring big issues, mm-hmm. or responding to that too softly. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden something big happens, like the corona crisis, and then we overreact. Mm-hmm. And that lack of response before, and then the bigger faulty response later, that forces us to go in that downward trajectory. Did I summarize that somewhat adequate?
Yeah, I think actually I've been thinking about this in the sense that like doctors look for biomarkers of disease. And so the disease doesn't have to be apparent yet. And I've tried to act in the same way as a psychologist, to look for not biomarkers,
Science.
but markers of collapse. So, and if you look historically, then you see two really important markers. One is increasing inequalities. There's a very important one. And the one related to it is dwindling access to resources. So what happens is there are going to be two layers, like the elite and the masses. And usually in a normal society, there is elite and masses, but the difference is not that huge. But if that increases like hugely, and before the fall of Rome, for instance, there was a huge increase in inequalities in the sense that the elite was earning much more money than the masses. And so there was a poor and impoverished masses and a very rich elite. So that was right before that. And so there's access to resources. And if you look at access to resources, it's wealth, it's health, it's food, food insecurity. And so the most, let's say, extreme inequality is if you don't have access to food. You can't feed yourself anymore and you die from hunger. And hunger has doubled since 2020. So there's 950 million people going hungry. And there's, I think, last time I looked through, 365 million that are really, really, let's say, they can die from hunger at any moment. So that's really a lot.
So you're making a summary of some issues, and I feel those too. You see, well, food scarcity, maybe not in the Netherlands, but it is becoming more expensive. So access to food is becoming more and more problematic for people if you can't afford it. Same for energy. You can heat your house if you're rich, but everybody's is in.
Yeah, there was a Dutch journalist writing that this winter we would have to choose between food, going hungry, or
And this is a real
warmth in houses.
This is a real situation for very many people in the Netherlands and all over the world currently. So, yeah, hearing you talk a moment ago, that reminds me of the Maslow pyramid. So we want to learn and develop ourselves, and self-actualization would be the top thing. But on the bottom is security. And that's where you started with the social safety theory.
Yes.
If you feel secure and safe, that's good for your health. But if you don't, like we've been scared for the last couple of years, that's a basic need. Otherwise, you become sick. Same with food, same with shelter, same with energy. So we've been kicked back to the bottom part of the Maslow pyramid.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that people and societies can go into a survival mode.
Yeah.
So individuals and groups, but the whole societies can go into the survival mode. What happens is this elite starts to behave in a dysfunctional way, but also the masses are behaving dysfunctionally. And so they're kind of feeding into each other and all behaving in a dysfunctional way. And so there's people pointing this out, and they are being demonized, or if there's less academic freedom, and there's less freedom in general. So all these markers you see, and so I made this whole model where I pointed all those issues out, and I make the simplified model where I just say, okay, here you have a society that is growing, so people are being, building a whole society together. Then there's the first phase, and then there's second phase that is a relatively stable society, phase 2, and within that phase 2, there's already the markers of, inequalities are rising, and then in the third phase, this is becoming dysfunctional, and a dysfunctional society. In the fourth, you will get, basically what Michael Yon has coined the term of a triangle of death, war, famine, and pandemics.
Yeah.
So that is then in this last phase, and there's a lot of people, and then there is a population, the numbers in the population go down because people die.
I've talked to, I've been a journalist for many years now. One of the people that I regard highly and have talked to a couple of times is Mr. Martin Armstrong from the United States. He analyzes things cyclically, and he sees cyclical patterns in pretty much everything. And if he explains them, you can only argue, well, he's got a point, leading into a question. Is this part of human nature? Are we destined to go through like a winter phase in societal decline as we are now, to emerge from that in a new kind of spring, just like after the Roman Empire or whatever? We've been through this before. Is it inevitable? Is it human nature, or what? How do you see it progress? What can we do?
I think it is not inevitable. The only thing is that it happens all the time, and we don't learn from history. So what happens is indeed this cyclical, and so there's population growth, there's prosperity, and then we kind of turn against each other somehow. And there is this self-destructive mode that is being, and I'm not sure why, but that happens, and then there's this decline, and then it's like a forest fire, and then the new,
exactly like the phoenix, we rise from the ashes.
Yeah.
So, and also you made the comparison to companies, to individuals, companies, and also if you're a company, you're selling auto part. No, better example, you're in the business of photography, and you're making film, photographic film. Yeah, older people like yourself and myself would remember that used to make pictures on film. Well, that changed, and the companies that didn't adapt to digital photography, they've gone away. You need to adapt and change with the changing circumstances, or you fail. That's in your paper also. And some companies managed to adapt and still lead. What do we need to do as a society, as a global company, to adapt and survive?
Yeah, of course, I'm a management scholar, so that's why I also have several examples of companies, and It's also called sometimes the corporate heart attack. That people see the signs, but they don't react on the signs. So the first thing that is really important is to recognize these signs and to act on them in a proper way. So if you overreact, like before the crisis, I argue that there was an underreaction to to all the social crises that we had in the world, and now there's an overreaction on the corona crisis, because governments took control and said, okay, now we are going to decide what's good for everyone, and we decide on one solution, and everybody should get jabbed, everybody should. So there's one path leading to only one solution, and there was really a lot of pressure to do that. I think we should recognize, okay, there is a problem. How do we solve it? Involve people, because if we use only a few brains, then there's bound to be not a good solution, especially if it's people that have a lot of stakes in a lot of, I don't know, companies, or want to make money out of the situation. We need everybody's brain. And how can we do that? First of all, I think what I mentioned in the paper is we need turnaround leadership. If you think of a turnaround leader that really helped a country, usually people mention Nelson Mandela. And I think he did a lot of good things. I think the process hasn't finished yet, but at least to make a good start is, for instance, what I also mentioned is avoid a blame game. We can start blaming who did this? Why did the government take control? Who is to blame for this? We're not getting anywhere. I think we need to think, okay, how can we constructively make sure to avoid the end phase, like the war and pandemic. And I don't know if it's still possible to avoid it, but we can at least give it a try and say, how can we turn around? How can we make sure people, it's good for humanity and good for everyone?
And soften the blow, maybe. That's what Martin Armstrong also says. You will go through these cycles, and what we can do collectively is maybe have not that hard a landing as we would have if we just ignore the signs and just blunder through like we have before in history.
Yeah, the thing is that if people, and that's why I have this end mail analogy, because people, tend to go on the same road that they already went, and then it's really hard to get out of this end mail and say, okay, what can we do different? What went wrong? How can we learn from that? And that was actually my original research, reflexivity in teams, and that is to think about and learn from mistakes, and that is so underestimated but so important. So that is the next thing you can do. So reflect on the current situation. What do we want? And it is good to know what you don't want, but it's even more important to have a vision of a future that you do want. That is the main thing, and everybody can formulate that vision. I have said it before in films. I wrote a letter to the future exercise, and everybody can do that. So you can write for yourself, what is the future that I want? What is the future going to be if we don't change anything? And how can we contribute? How can I as a person contribute to that ideal future for the world, the ideal future for myself? So that is really important. So you need to involve society members. You can't just bypass them and say, this is the right solution, we thought about it, and this is it.
Well, we are in a situation, when describing the Netherlands, but this is pretty much true for every Western country at the least, in a situation where our leadership would say, well, we have the solution. We need to pick a fight with that country. We need to stop using resources like natural gas. We need to even cut back on food supply. That's what's happening in the Netherlands, reducing the farmers. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is, well, that's our leadership that's saying we have the solution, mm-hmm. and they appear to be making the mistakes leading us downward that death spiral. Mm-hmm. And you're opposing that with the people themselves should come up with solutions for their situation, because I cannot influence what the Prime Minister is doing here. Mm-hmm. I'm just me with my little podcast in my living room.
Yeah, well, what can I do? Personally, I think we need more direct democracy, because we choose the government, and then for 4 years they can do whatever they want, and we hardly have any influence. And also, what Jordan Peterson mentioned before, the subsidiarity principle. If I don't have anything to say about what's happening in my street, in my front yard, I can say something, not even everything. But if there's a kindergarten, a playground nearby, then I don't have any say in it. But I have a kid too. I want to have a say in that. I pay taxes. Why shouldn't I have a say in that?
Yeah, okay.
That's a very simple example.
I'll be more blunt. In the Netherlands, our prime minister quit. He got fired. He got booted out of government because he didn't solve a problem that was there lingering for years under his management.
Mm-hmm.
Then we voted, and like a year later, he's back, and now we're under the same prime minister. Mm-hmm. How? I know you can't solve the problems of the world, but we are in the death spiral, stuck with the same prime minister again, not fixing it on government level.
Yeah, I think this is terrible, because what happens if you, for instance, you mentioned the farmers, you mentioned, well, if they can't produce enough food, then we are bound to go hungry. Maybe not in the Netherlands right away, but if we are the second food producer in the world, then somebody is bound to go hungry.
If you don't produce, somebody's going to go hungry.
Yeah. So what can you do? Well, you can try to solve it partly for yourself. Try to make sure you have seeds in your home, you have some food, but this is only a symptom. This is only how you, how you survive the problems that are created, which are, in my view, not necessary.
In your paper that you co-authored with Johnny Ioannidis and Matthias Luijks, you make the example of companies that do successfully adapt to situations. What kind of management is successful in breaking through that death spiral and making it a growth spiral? How does that work?
Actually, it's been found that the most directive ones, it doesn't really work. So they have to go to the departments, listen to what the people have to say, and also follow up on the lead. So people need to have the feeling that it sounds really simple, but that they're listened to, that their thoughts and their problems are being listened to, and that something is going to happen. And that management that says, okay, we're going to cut back, that's usually a kind of a reaction. We're going to cut back on costs. And then they lay off people, and then they enter this death spiral. Because if you don't invest anymore, then there's no innovation. And but some of them usually actually do invest even more money, and then they manage to turn the situation around. But it has to be a whole package. It's not just one thing. People always want a simple solution. There are never really very simple solutions.
No, but it is the most challenging of times. I mean, I'm 52 now. This is new for me in my lifetime, and I think what we're going through here is new at least since World War II. So we're in, for this generation, unprecedented times.
It's unprecedented in the sense the scale is unprecedented, and
now it's even more global than a world war was global.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, because the whole crisis was seen as a global crisis, and everybody had to make the same solution, because the governments looked at one organization, the WHO, to come up with solutions, and they had to think for the whole world. So it was even worse than just a government making wrong decisions. Yeah,
okay, and what you're opposing that with, what you're suggesting with your paper, if I understand correctly, is that we shouldn't look up to a leader that's saying what we should do, like the World Health Organization or your prime minister in your country, but that you need to think for yourself and reorganize for yourself. Is that what you're saying?
That is the first step to take, and also make your own and organize together with other people, because you can't do things alone. For instance, Michael Yon is giving an example of Japan, when there was a real big famine in Japan. There was a group of people helping each other, and they had this network. So they formed this network of people that said, okay, if the times get tough, we are going to help each other. And that is really important, because human race has been so successful because we helped each other. And if we start fighting each other, we go down the drain.
So your paper has the ambition to describe a phenomenon that hasn't been described in this way before. You call it the death spiral. Mm-hmm. Does it also describe how we get out of it? Are there solutions in there? What's your intent? Describe a phenomenon. Are you also going to volunteer it to the powers that be, or what do you want to do with it?
I want everybody to read it and it's not in a very difficult language. I hope you read part of it. I hope it's.
No, that's.
And I'm making these films to say, okay, we can go down. If there is a downward spiral, we can also go into an upward spiral. So what is the first step? Well, make sure to try to see if there's a turnaround leader. If we can find a turnaround leader, we have to do it ourselves. What can we do? We can reflect on the current situation. We can step out of this end mill. We can say, okay, what is the situation we don't want? What is the situation we do want? And how do we develop a strategy ourselves? So groups of people can do that. And I think it's not a good idea to follow gurus. I've seen a lot of gurus around, and then people go from a dysfunctional leader to another dysfunctional leader that offers a solution or says he or she is going to offer a solution.
In the Netherlands, if you don't like the opponent, you're going to compare him eventually to Hitler or Putin or Trump, for that matter. How do I distinguish between a guru that doesn't fix the problems and the turnaround leader, the way you call it? What's the difference?
You will feel the difference, because it's hard to tell. But if this person really speaks to you, listens to people, and is not like a narcissist who only wants to have his or her own solution, because usually then. But it's really hard. People like to have like a very clear leader that says, okay, this is my vision and please follow it. But if there's a leader that says, okay, it's not about me, but it's about you, it's about your vision, your ideas, then I think you are a step further. And but you will feel the difference. You should feel the difference if you have a connection to yourself, to your heart, to your.
Okay. Yeah, question that I maybe let's see how you answer that one. But you're the lead author on this paper. You've been working with the most quoted scientist in this field, Mr. Johnny Ioannidis. How's that? How does that work if you write a paper together?
It's great. It's great. It's interesting because Michael Levitt, who was a Nobel Prize winner, also worked with him, and he wrote on Twitter that he felt like a PhD student again. Working with Johnny Ioannidis. And in a sense, that's true. And on the other hand, it's so great to work with somebody who asks the right questions, because sometimes he asks a question and then I come into a whole new literature and I find out so many new things. And it's only one simple question that he writes as a comment. And yeah, it's just, he just says, okay, I want the paper to be shorter. I always write too much. And he is really helpful in shortening it down.
You have
really,
to kill your darlings. Yeah.
Well, he does it for me. So that's really nice. So he cuts it down and he keeps telling me it's too much. And I say, yeah, but my first versions are always too long. And please help me in shortening it.
What did we miss? What is in your paper that I haven't touched upon? What do you want to tell us about it?
Let's see. What I think is in such situations, it's really a first step is also to strengthen or reinstate democracy. But what you see in a dwindling or downward spiral society, the democracy is under pressure, like scientific freedom, but also the democracy, the freedoms of everyone. And that has to be reinstated, like really, really in a clear way. And you see, like in the Spanish War, the Dutch fought the Spanish for 80 years. After that, we had the Akte van Verlatingen, the Act of Abjuration. And it says that we even have to make sure if the elite is not good for the people, or the ruler or the king, he or she should be not only abandoned, but taken out of office. And that's what it says. And that's also the same is for the Declaration of Independence.
There's an obligation to the people to stand up for themselves and remove the old leadership. And it can be in a soft but decisive way, the way Nelson Mandela did that also.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be with violence that some people might call for if you're feeling...
Yeah, I hear a lot of calls for violence these days, and that is really, it scares me because it's not necessary. I think we can be very decisive and say autonomous and say this is what we want. And the people are with, millions, billions of people and what we've also not learned is to withstand manipulation. Psychological manipulation I see a lot these days, and a lot of people don't even recognize it. And that's why they don't recognize the wrong leaders and they follow the wrong leaders. And they ask for more. Please tell me how I should live my life. No, you shouldn't be told how to live your life. Think about how you can lead your life and live your most exciting life.
One way to reach out to people is to talk about it, as like we are doing now.
Yeah.
So that's a way to reach out to people. Are there other means? How would you reach the masses if the television is not doing this job for you? What we are recording here is not going to be aired nationally.
I think a lot of people are listening to alternative channels these days. I saw the statistics that Robert Malone gave, that he alone has more viewers than CNN, I think, these days. I was thinking, whoa, I didn't even know that. But so small channels with not many people are reaching many people. And if they don't, people have to do their own research and their own, I always also compare it a little bit with if you have like a disease or something and you don't know what it is, and then you go to the doctor and you feel like, no, it's not a good diagnosis. And then you come to another doctor and he or she is telling you a diagnosis and you think, yes, that's it. And so you have to feel it, to recognize it.
A moment ago, you mentioned we have to reinstate democratic structures.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen this in our conversations before. You're more of the optimist as compared to me, and being reluctant to take that optimistic path. The reaction that I had at that moment that you said that was, we're under World Health Organization, not elected. It's not an elected body. It's been financed by one of the wealthiest people in the world, Bill Gates. Mm-hmm. So there's the difference between rich people and the masses that we're suffering currently. We're in Europe, where Ursula von der Leyen was not elected, and where the entire management is not elected. And we can't really reinstate democracy in Europe or in World Health because it's never been a democratic organization. I know you can't solve it, but how would you respond to that?
I think it's a few people with a lot of money, but then there are many people with all of them having their own brains, and you can take autonomy for your own life at least and start with that. You can start small in your own environment. What is the life that I want to lead? So be like humanus, being nice to each other, even causing these positive ripple effects. This is the way to counteract it, because personally, I feel like I want to neglect that. I don't want to pay too much attention to all these people who are trying to use their money to influence the world, because we can influence the world as well. But that's what we're doing with this talk and with the papers I write.
As long as we follow the organizations that are based on wealthy individuals' private money, we will follow that downward trajectory. If you want to break that, start with yourself, start listening to your gut feeling, and follow, what was the term again? The natural leaders? What was it again? Turnaround leaders.
Turnaround leaders, yeah.
That will also rise to the occasion then?
Yeah. Or become a turnaround leader yourself.
How are you doing with, you're pointing at me.
Well, I mean in general.
Yeah, okay. Have we said everything about this paper that there's to say at this point, Michaela?
I think so, yeah. Maybe I can just read the last...
When it's done, are you going to volunteer it to our government? How does that work?
I might, yeah, I might.
Hi, Mark Rutte, I've written something.
I'm going to send links to the people in the government that I know, and I will, and definitely.
Maybe we should talk about to some politicians when it's done. How's that?
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. But let me read the last sentences. Yeah. Maybe that's a good idea. Cool. In short, our review, synthesizing research from several fields, indicates that next to turnaround leadership and building resilient communities, I didn't mention that one yet, but resilient communities was basically what I talked about if you have this network, using compassion, avoiding a blame culture, and strengthening of democracy may help. Ideally, public health agencies, governments, companies, all relevant stakeholders as well as individuals should collaborate towards the goals of a healthier and happier future for all.